Good afternoon. I call it Kasinomics, the economics of the informal economy. And the reason I call it Kasinomics is because the problem with the term informal, it implies unstructured, small-scale, survivalist, subsistence, low profit, low tech, and. And in many ways, while those exist, the vast proportion, my experience of this economy is that they are not that. And in fact, the future of economic activity is within this informal economy. The subtitle of Kasinomics there on my slide, the vast scale of the informal economy, probably tells you that I have a slightly different perspective to the prof in terms of the size of the informal economy. Why am I telling you about the informal economy or the Kasi? I grew up in a mud hut in a Zulu village in a place called Msinga in KwaZulu-Natal. My parents were political activists and brought us up very poor, very much like the Zulu kids. My mother taught us at home. People often say, where's Msinga? And I used to struggle to tell people. Now I just say it's next to Nkandla, so it gives you an idea. I moved and I was never able to go to university, and I still have a very bad matric. I never managed to qualify in anything, but I got into business relatively early. I moved to Johannesburg, and in Msinga they call it Wandonga Ziyaduma, which means the place where the walls thunder, because it's a loud, scary place if you come from Msinga. Moved to Johannesburg and basically started a business with two of my comrades from the political space, Sandile and Jablani, called Minanawe Marketing. And at the time, which was the early 90s, it was the first business to believe that there was a massive scale of businesses in this informal economy. And Minanawe was the first business to really focus on this, and we became, over 18 years, the largest business of its kind in South Africa. And I have worked with practically every business from a Capitec through to a Unilever and everyone in between. And the reason I say that is quite important. I'm not an academic. As I said, I have a very bad matric. My primary skills were goat herding and stick fighting. So I'm approaching this from a business perspective. So this on the left-hand side is a gorda, the hamburger of the townships, a quarter loaf of bread with slab chips, polony, and acha. As you can see, it's endorsed by the Heart Foundation, Banting friendly. In 2005, I was asked by Parmalat to launch cheese slices in the townships. And at the time, cheese did not exist in any format. In fact, rich black kids were called cheese boys or cheese girls because only rich black kids got cheese. And they asked us to launch cheese slices in 2005. And we said to them we want to launch into Gordas and Amagwinya or Vetkoek. And today, Parmalat sells 3 billion rands worth of cheese slices a year in a market that never existed before, going into Gordas and into Amagwinya. And just gives you a sense of the scale of this kind of space. The lady on the right-hand side there, Riolo Bogile, is in Pimville in Soweto, and I was there last week, and I was with the person from Supreme Flour, the marketing director of Supreme Flour, because we work with about 5,000 township bakeries and Vetkoek fryers. She buys and she buys 400 12.5 kg bags of flour a month, and she makes 4,000 amagwinya every single day that she sells for R1.50, along with cheese slices, polony, and so on and so forth. And so while we have these survivalist businesses, we also have very substantial businesses in this space. The other part that we need to recognize about this economy is that where do these Gorda outlets get their bread from? They don't go to Boxer or to ShopRite, whatever. The vast proportion of them buy unsliced loaves of bread from Gasi bakeries. And this points to a circular economy. Often we kind of say, well, the opportunities lie in a bakery supplying Woolworths or Pick and Pay or stuff. That will kill that business. There is no way that supplying the formal sector works. Actually, the power lies within these circular economies. People like Date Sam on the top left over there in Soweto, head librarian at UNISA and left because his side hustle of baking was doing better than his day job. And has 2 bakeries and bakes 1,200 loaves of bread, cakes, scones, and so on at his outlet. On the right-hand side, Abraham was a CA, and he left that business. He's got a bakery in Garangua, just north of Pretoria here. He's in a little RDP house. He took the ceilings out, and he bakes 12,000 loaves of bread a day, and he has 3 bakkies that deliver to Gorda outlets, spaza shops, and so on and so forth. So many people who are successful also come out of the formal sector and actually enter into these kind of spaces. So first of all, we must consider the circular nature of this space and where the opportunities lie. It seems absurd to me that a lot of the time I hear policymakers and politicians saying, well, we need to get more, these people selling into this formal sector. ShopRite, Pick and Pay, all these guys are getting into the township at the same time as we're telling township entrepreneurs to get out of the township. It seems absurd. So another part of the informal economy is the amaroom or backroom rental, which is a terrible term of backroom rental. This was a headline the other day. Cape Town's next property millionaires come from here. That's not the Atlantic seaboard. That is renting micro rental units in the townships around the Western Cape. There's a massive business. 30 billion rand a year is earned conservatively by South African households in rental. And in fact, why is this? We often don't understand these kind of things. If we look at our population of 20 million households in South Africa today, according to SA General Household Survey, 27%, in fact, the recent one came out, 29% of households, 30%, let's call it, a third of those 20 million households are one-person households. And 39% of households are 2 to 3-person households. With a massive growth of smaller households, and to accommodate these, people are building these amaroom, and these are, in essence, we're seeing this densification within this township space. And despite this, we have a massive shortage of these kind of micro rental units. Around these concentrations of micro rental units, we find a proliferation of businesses. Like, I took the picture on the left there, that's a young lady who started a laundromat. Opposite her is about 50 amaroom, and those people get their washing done there. Gyms like Ivory Park, and tacky cleaning, tattoos, and so on and so forth. One of the lessons around this is when we understand who are the people within certain environments, then we start recognizing what are the businesses that actually supply those people. The single households, they go and eat out. They go to the Gorda outlet or the Chicken Dust outlet and so on. They don't want to cook within those outlets. They don't want to do their laundry and so on and so forth. So understanding those dynamics of those spaces become very important. How's this for a stat? There are more houses worth 1.5 million rand in building materials only in the former rural homelands, not in the townships, just in the rural homelands, than the city of Cape Town, from Melkbosrand to Gordons Bay, plus Wellington, Stellenbosch, and Franschhoek added together. That's in building materials only. We have a massive building sector in the rural areas with almost 2 trillion rands worth of high-value real estate. If you go to any rural area, go to Puredichaba, go to Mkanduli, go to Pongola, go to Ulundi, go to Mokwase, you will find these incredible places being built. In fact, 26% of the black middle class, 1 million black individuals, live in rural areas. And rural towns are booming. Those same towns I mentioned are doing incredibly well, actually driven by this kind of economy. And this is from PPC Cement's latest financial statements. In South Africa, the formal construction sector faces big challenges. PPC has identified pockets of resilience in informal construction, demand rising in rural areas, driven by rural construction. One of the mistakes we make when we talk about the informal economy is we have an image in our heads. It's a little hole-in-the-wall spaza shop, or it's a hawker. Do we think of people building mansions like this, those informal builders? And there's a cement company telling you that the growth is not coming from the formal sector, it's coming from informal construction. And how is that informal construction paid for? Through lay-by, society. Most people confuse stokvels, like stokvela, where gogos by groza, with a society, which are more lending type outlets, and a society of both saving and lending entities. Then what I call brick by brick home loans. Every month people go and buy some bricks or cement and so on. In fact, I make this joke, in the old days you had your bed raised up on paint tins or bricks because of the dogolosh. Today you raise it up because you have cement and tiles and everything stacked on there before you start building. And then remittances sent into those kind of spaces. And so we have a large number of these construction workers who paid informally, no formal finance in this building sector, and a large number of builders and building and related things, mattress makers. The number of mattress makers is quite startling in these places. People who are doing aluminium windows and doors. Aluminium windows, chrome gutters, pillars, or, that's what you see in these kind of places. That was in Khayelitsha, chrome, stainless steel gate, tiles. This guy on the left-hand side here, he's got Elliot, is in Orlando East, and he has a woodworking business where he cuts so PG Bison supplies these products, which are high-end wood products, and then they cut them up, they edge them, and then they give them to a guy like Elliot, gives them to sells them to the woodworkers, who then go off and put in cupboards and stuff. The cupboard business and kitchen surfaces sector in the townships is booming. PG Bison, 42% of their business now comes from the township of high-end wood surfaces. Elliot over there started selling Bakigili, which is chocolate eclairs and chappies, and today has 30 million rands worth of equipment on his floor, all purchase cash, working in that space. So often we think there's no light industry in this space. We're just not looking for it in the right places. So when I say I'm involved in the township economy, people say spaza shops, and it drives me crazy. It's one of the big mistakes we have to think about. When we think about this space, we think about the breadth of this kind of space. Yes, there are spazas, 190 billion rand a year. About 70% of those are Somali, Ethiopian, Pakistani, and Bangladeshi, who pay 25 billion rand a year to South African households to rent those spaza shops because they don't own those properties. We have beauty. A fun fact. According to Hollard Marine, the most stolen imported product in South Africa's ports is wigs, hair extensions, massive growth in the beauty sector, 10 billion rand a year, taverns, 44,500 licensed taverns, 110 billion rand a year, and then Gasi, of course, the fast food sector, everything from chicken dust to Maudwana and everything in between, 90 billion rand a year. And of course, this beauty sector, the food sector is 100% South African. So when we have this perception that the informal economy is dominated by the foreign traders, the spaza sector is. The rest of them are not. We have a huge amount of vehicle ownership. 12 million vehicles on our roads, of which 9 million of them are uninsured and 9.5 million of them are unfinanced. Massive growth of personal vehicles, and we have about 80,000 auto traders, Gasi mechanics, panel beaters servicing that space, and increasingly taking advantage of things like the e-hailing sector, providing servicing into that place. There's a recent law made called the right to repair, where anyone, you don't have to take your Ford to a Ford and your BMW to a BMW, as long as that mechanic can provide original parts, they can service it. This represents a massive opportunity of growing that sector. And just to point to the growth of personal car ownership, Leratong Mall, which is being built in the West Rand, 50 fashion retailers, 14 quick service restaurants, including 3 sit-downs and 3 drive-thrus. This development is a remarkable shift from the past, says Jason McCormick, who's the CEO. Car ownership in townships was too low to support such formats. Now car ownership is changing the way we design shopping centers. All of those vehicles purchased cash, not financed. We have a huge bakkie brigade, whether they're in the building sector, outside the fruit and veg markets, outside wholesalers, and it's a growing sector where you, in essence, it's like an Uberized system. You walk out of the market with your cabbages or potatoes, and then you go up to a bakkie, you negotiate a deal, and then they take you back to where you're going to resell those. But it's not only in those sectors, there's many others. My friend Bulelani Balabala from the Township Entrepreneurs Alliance, he should actually be here. He wrote, he's called Mr. Get Things Done. He works with, I think, about 100,000 township entrepreneurs. And he was talking about Sipho in Orange Farm, who started cleaning bills. Today, Sipho started his own bin cleaning service. Today he works 1 day a week and earns 14,000 Rand a month by cleaning bins in his community. The biggest tragedy is Sipho started trying to get the other youth in his township to come and join him and start their own little businesses, and they said, we don't want to clean bills, that's not a job for us. And so we looked wrongly at also what is a job and so on. So this is a great book, The Chaos Precinct. It's a great title, by Tanya Zak, about the inner city of Johannesburg, the Ethiopian Quarter. And we have Little Mogadishu, which is Mayfair. And so the informal sector is not only in townships and rural areas, it's also in inner cities. And in the research they did, cross-border shoppers were spending 10 billion Rand a year in Joburg CBD 10 years ago. Can you imagine the scale of that? The annual profit in 53 blocks, 3,000 shops amount to close to 7 billion Rand profit a year, 10 years ago. So when we look at informal sector, are we considering these kind of spaces as well? So I don't have time to go through it today, but if you take a mirror to the formal economy, you'll find every business represented in the informal economy. By my numbers, that informal economy is worth R1 trillion a year, which, to put in perspective, is larger than the agriculture and mining sectors added together. And that's just on figures I have access to. These aren't my figures, these are from various sources. But it includes the taxi sector we know and love, 50 billion Rand a year, 18 billion Rand in the muti sector, even goat sales in rural KZN, 3 billion Rand a year. A very big sector. And people challenge me, they say, R1 trillion, it's impossible. In fact, the only person who the other day, I've got a new book called Kasinomics Unleashed, and one of the heads of a taxi financing business, a listed taxi financing business, read my book, and in it I said the taxi sector is worth 50 billion Rand across 250,000 taxis. You see, GG, you underestimate that. It's probably 3 times that size. So, but this was work done by Finscope, MSME survey in South Africa in 2024. They say the informal economy is worth 2.3 trillion Rand a year. So choose a number between 1 and 2.3 trillion. So I'm going to flip through this. So where's the money? So, as I said earlier, I'm involved in business. I don't do research. I don't understand research. I don't understand many of those formulas. But I'm not the only one who is seeing a massive growth of this informal economy. And we should have a couple more CEOs here. And this was an article in August 25, South Africa's informal economy becoming a giant. Well worth looking at. But I just want to quote a couple of people. Exemplar, who have shopping centers in rural and rural areas and townships. The most striking turnover at grocery anchors and fashion retailers outpaced inflation for years. The most striking trend is spend on fast food and fashion growing 4 to 5 times the inflation rate in township malls, buoyed by money made in the informal sector. And he attributes the company's success to the vitality of the informal economy. Vugile Property Fund, Itumeleng saying, township and rural retail portfolios outperformed urban and inner city commuter portfolios over the past 5 years. Township economy expanding faster than other segments. Township mall owner Dibula, informal economy holds its own. Nedbank, SA portfolio outperformed in townships in every metric. I can go on. Gerrie Fourie, ex-CEO of Capitec, economy stronger in the informal market than anyone anticipates. TFG, the Fashini Group, massive informal economy and a lot of it's cash. That's not me talking. These are guys in their financial statements. That is where the money is. And how is that possible that township shopping centers and rural township shopping centers are 2 to 3 times higher what they call trading densities, turnover per square meter than inner city ones if we did not have a massive informal economy. And I'm just going to wrap up to talk a little bit about unemployment. This lady over here, I was at a school in Tembisa and I was chatting to her and I said, how long have you been selling here? She sells snacks and sweets and food to school kids. She said, 26 years. I'm like, 26 years selling from that bucket and plank. She said, I have put 2 children through university selling from here and my husband has been unemployed the entire time. And for 26 years, she has been selling from there. And I said to her, is this a job? She said, Ngiyasebenza anginamsebenzi, which is a play on words. I work, but I do not have work, because a job is defined as a payslip. We do not have a payslip. We do not measure it as work. And in fact, put her in perspective. There are 25,000 government schools in South Africa, of which 12,000 of those are in townships or rural areas. And every single township and rural school, as almost all of you here will know, has between 3 and 5 school mamas in those schoolyards selling snacks and sweets and so on and so forth. Just imagine the size of that. That's a 3 billion rand a year sector, just in school mamas sitting there. So on the right-hand side here, this is in Khayelitsha. This lady over here, we went to visit her with the guys from Shoprite Financial Services, and we're trying to understand bank accounts. We said to her, she's got 6 back rooms, 3 at the top and 3 at the bottom. She rents out for 3,000 rand each. We said, do you bank that money? She says, I used to bank the money, but she says, then the government saw it and stopped paying me my social grant. So now I get the money in my bank account, is my social grant in my bank account, and I get my rental cash. And we said, well, why do you think that's right? She said, every single month for 10 years, I took part of that money, I went and lay-by building materials and slowly built up that building. And she said, at the end of 10 years, I have this. Isn't that what we should be doing with our social grant? And actually, we should be helping us. The government should be encouraging us to use it like this, not stopping us paying that. Now, you can say what you feel about that. But if you look at SA General Household Survey, according to SA General Household Survey, 23% of social grant recipient households say the social grant is their main or only form of income. And I saw this as a headline, shock and horror. 23% of households that receive a social grant say it's their only or main form of income. 77% are saying it is not the only form of income. 77% of social grant recipients are actually earning other forms of money outside of that. That's extraordinary. We're a nation of entrepreneurs and we should be celebrating that. But staying with social grants, Capitec's internal data for social grants. This is according to Gerrie Fourie. When you compare their social grant income against other income streams, the income is actually about 5 times higher. This is according to Capitec, who have 3 trillion data points, 25 million customers. And Gerrie says, I agree with GG, real unemployment or lack of an income. So remember, passive income is not a job. Those people earning rental incomes, are they saying when they're asked, yes, I've got another income, but I don't have a job? Among youth who are classified as unemployed and looking for work, 41% are earning up to 15,000 rand a month, according to African Response Survey. The informal economy is not only massive, but it is not so informal. We must stop thinking of it as informal. And more importantly, we need to recognize it. We should be celebrating that economy. And when we recognize how big it is, we stop thinking about how to create more entrepreneurs or more informal economy businesses. We start thinking differently about how do we scale them up. Andrew is 100% right. There's no space in those spaces for more people, more entrepreneurs. We do not need more. We need to say, I talk about, it's not about startup, it's about how we can scale them up. And the more we scale them up, the more jobs they create, the bigger they become, the more sustainable they become, and the more established they become. And I ended one of my books with this. This is the next great frontier of Africa, the informal business sector. This informal world is inhabited by tribes of survivors, of gasipreneurs, of tabletop traders, hawkers and hustlers, gasikos restaurateurs, spaza superstores, and backroom rental barons. Go among them, give them respect. They are the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Andrew and GG on those fantastic presentations. By the way, ladies and gentlemen, we are live on Ubuntu Radio. So this conversation is broadcasted on Ubuntu Radio as we speak. We are going to open up for questions, but before that, I'm going to invite Professor Vimal to join us for our panel discussion. Let's welcome Professor Vimal as he comes up for our discussion. GG, I think you highlighted the vastness of the informal economy that exists, especially in Kasi, as you term it. If we're really serious about unlocking opportunities in those informal economies, what sort of interventions would we look at?
One of the first ones, probably just leave them alone. Because to a large extent, they get harassed by authorities. I would say there's many things, but so first of all, we should be creating policies around different sectors, because each sector is different, and what Amaroom needs is different to a beauty salon, is different to a Kota outlet, and so on and so forth. So I think we need to look at that separately. I believe that there are probably three primary shifts that we can do. The first one for me is, how do we fix the infrastructure within the Gasi area so that there's electricity and not load reduction, that there's better water, better waste removal, and so on and so forth. The second one for me is about security of tenure, as in people invest in a business when they know that they are here, they can extend, they can build it up, and they can do whatever. And in many cases, most of businesses are in a street, in a taxi rank, in front of a house, in a back room behind a house, and people don't have title deeds and things like that. So how do we make sure that you feel that you own this place and that you have that security, you can invest in it, and more importantly, you can sell that business at any stage because you have this ability to sell the access to this point. And then the last one for me, and I wrote about this in my last book because I've really struggled with it. A lot of people talk about finance. I think finance is the least thing people need. The biggest thing is marketing. Is how do you can say there's a baker and then they say they want a bakkie so they can sell more, but they can get the finance for the bakkie, but now how do they create new markets? And they get the bakkie and then, now they struggle to find new markets. So marketing is about creating a brand, creating this, and most importantly, how do you sell and market your business to a greater audience? And I think that it's the most unexplored part of entrepreneurship is that marketing.
Andrew, GG speaks about building businesses that can be resilient, and at some point, thinking about selling those businesses. But you say in your survey, only 27 of those businesses that you looked at in 2020 survived, actually. Is it from a survivalist perspective that those businesses were started just to create a livelihood for themselves? Or are there other things that are influencing, the businesses actually surviving and actually becoming those businesses that can be sold on in future?
Yeah, I think it's a difficult question. So most people enter for survivalist reasons. They're unemployed, they haven't got opportunities. So entering the informal economy becomes an opportunity to make a little bit of income, to make ends meet. And over time, the opportunity might grow. But scaling is very difficult. And I think it's extremely important that we recognize that the failure of businesses to grow is not a South African unique problem. across the world, most small businesses don't grow. And being a little bit honest about that is extremely helpful. Yes, you can survive in time, but it's very, very difficult to scale without access to networks, without access to capital, without strong institutions. And where I slightly disagree with GG is that informal institutions are strong. The reason that people feel happy to spend so much money in the traditional areas on housing is because they know that the traditional institutions will safeguard their investment. So the most important thing is not whether it's a formal institution or whether it's an informal, but is that institution stable? And a lot of the institutions that we see are unstable, whether they be formal because of the way the state polices, it closes down businesses. The state is very erratic. Most of the time it doesn't regulate, but then every now and again there will be an issue and then it'll jump in with both feet. At the same time, informal institutions are unpredictable. They can often be controlled by violent elements who impose tax. In the Western Cape, we see for everyone who builds a house, if you've got 10 rooms, you have to give 2 or 3 rooms within an extortionate payment every month. So that unstable institutional environment is going to hinder growth. So it's a complicated scenario, but I want to encourage people to get away from obsessed with growth. The key thing is, how do we create the environment in which people can sustain themselves, make a little bit of money, and if a better opportunity comes in a job or whatever the situation is, great. That's the most important thing. It's not that we want a business for the sake of a business.
And maybe, Prof, is that maybe something that we need to rethink? The fact that, we're waiting for better opportunities to come, or, what terms employment versus unemployment? Is that something that we probably need to rethink as a whole?
Yeah, I think, you've highlighted 2 different things. One is that it's not so clear, and both of them have said that it's not just like binary, informal, formal. There's like layers and complexities in the middle with scale, and sometimes very complex and niched organizations which would be competitive. It's just that they're not registering for whatever reasons. But the second thing you asked about, and was also talked about, is what happens thereafter? What's the continuation? You've got someone who's doing something now, and like that lady you showed who put her kids through college. What do they do after that? Is it that they're then entering a corporate sector or public sector? And, so when you're thinking of, it's not just the moment in time survivalists, but it's also what are the empowerments that come with these activities. The other side of it, though, is that, but we don't know, we don't have data. Maybe you have better data, but we actually don't have the information to make clear, confident statements over the whole group, the whole population, actually.
And I think that's a question that was submitted on Slido by Bonolo, and I guess to GG and Andrew. And she says, or he says, that as informal sectors don't often hand out receipts, how did you get the profits? By interviewing owners or by looking at what they buy from, the big wholesalers? How did you actually get the numbers?
So the numbers I showed there of the total thing come from different places. The spaza sector comes from a company called Trade Intelligence. The taxi sector I mentioned, it used to be Transaction Capital, now it's Mobilays. And there's a number of sources. The fast food sector is from a industry work done by the fast food sector, the formal fast food sector, trying to understand why they have such competition. So here's the thing, though. If you looked at one of the slides I missed there, if you look at a company like Shop to Shop or Kazang or Ikorka, they have these devices accepting card payments on spaza shop, beauty salon, tavern, Gorda outlets, counters. You can tap your card to pay, or you can tap and do what's called cashback. You can withdraw money out of the till. About 50% of transactions of those kind of companies are now card, so there's been a big shift towards card. Kazang, which is a listed entity, does 72 billion rand a year from about 140,000 devices. Company like Shop to Shop does about 3 billion rand a year. These are registered formal businesses. You can see in that data, 150,000 outlets, you can get the data, anonymize it if necessary, but if you look at the business sector, we have large amounts of data. And that data is there. Capitec is saying, and Capitec got into trouble for arguing with Stats SA. Gerrie said that they're wrong. He said, well, they researched 30,000 people. He says he's got 3 trillion data points and 25 million customers. He's got the data. He's showing there that social grant recipients on their figures, and I think they've got 3 million or more social grant recipients who've got bank accounts with them, which they receive the social grant into. They're saying they earn up to 5 times that in other things. Guys, the data exists. We're a highly formalized space in terms of payments. We have this data. I don't believe, with all due respect, that the business sector's information, data, and expertise in this space is data mined, and their expertise and understanding of this space is underutilized. We're talking about creating jobs, about building economies, then surely we should be talking to the business sector and exploring that kind of information further. That information is there. Not one of those figures up there can I not substantiate with some sort of source that is turning it over. And that's why I said, where's the money? Here's another example. The Joburg City market, fruit and veg market, turns over 10 billion rand a year. There are 18 municipal markets in the country. And the Joburg Fresh Produce one is the largest. 10 billion rand, of which, according to their figures, 60% are informal traders. You cannot go and buy your potatoes cash at a municipal market. You put your money onto a card and then you pay the agent using the card. That's data. 60% of their data, they have the card, they know how many traders they have, and so on and so forth. That's municipally owned data in essence. That's just one source of data. How many more are there? And so 6 billion rand in Joburg Fresh Produce market is going through this informal economy.
We're going to open it up for our audience to take questions for our panelists. And do remember that we are live on Ubuntu Radio. That's www.ubunturadio.co.za and channel DSTV channel 888. So we're going to start here. We have a question here, and then we'll take about 3 or 4 questions for our panelists, and we'll proceed as that. Please go ahead. We can't hear you. Let's just sort out the mic. We do have a question that was also submitted on Slido, and I think also speaking to the informality of those businesses. And Spelele Kubisa says, unregistered and do not contribute tax. Do you think that the sector also places a fiscal burden on government while receiving the least direct benefits and support?
Yeah, okay, I'll have a stab at that. I think for many years, from a policy perspective, we've had a formalization obsession. We want businesses to be formalized, and so a huge amount of effort goes in trying to get the businesses to be formalized. And very often, immediately as businesses register themselves, they continue to conduct business in a highly informal way. So I think we need to rethink this emphasis on formalization, especially for the smaller firms that we are dealing with. In most of the case, these firms are providing indirect benefits to the economy through employment, through the procurement that GG has spoken about, and we have to look at them in that perspective, rather than trying to understand their turnover. And to go back to the previous question, I think it's incredibly difficult to really get a very accurate perspective of the profitability of a firm. We can look at proxy indicators, and I think Gigi has given some great examples. These are very helpful, but let's not get obsessed with whether, with the size of the business, particularly in the township context, and let's not get obsessed with formalization. I think formalization is really detracting from the business focusing its resources on building markets, strengthening networks, improving its product offering, ensuring that it has the kinds of value systems, entrepreneurial value systems, that are going to allow it to create the kind of networks and information exchanges that are critical to business survival.
Can I just add to that about tax? So I have a chapter in my book called To Tax and Not to Tax, because it's the first thing everyone thinks. I think the first thing we've got to define is, what are we talking about tax? Rates and taxes, UIF, PAYE, fuel levy, VAT, profit, tax on business profits, tax on personal income, and so on and so forth. So we have to understand that. But if we just looked at that spaza sector, that's call it 200 billion rand a year sector, that the vast proportion of them pay VAT but do not claim VAT. That is an 80 billion rand a year rough calculation in net benefit to the fiscus. If you look at the taxi sector, they travel 50 billion kilometers or something like that, I've got the number somewhere, and use X amount of fuel a year. And they pay a fuel levy, I think it's 4 rand a litre or something like that, and that's about 3 billion rand a year. Then if you look at companies like, for instance, Unilever, RCL, Capitec, Tiger Brands, etc., that is McCormick, the shopping centres. They are massively profitable businesses that, by their own admission, would not be profitable if there wasn't a township and informal economy sustaining them. And they are paying very big, they're paying tax on their profits at scale. And so if this economy wasn't there, all of those companies would be paying a lot less tax to the fiscus as well. So we have to also look at downstream. We look at rates and taxes. 4 million site and service and RDP houses have been built since 1994 by the government. All of those should be paying rates and taxes, but they don't pay rates and taxes. That's a decision by municipalities, a political one. It's got nothing to do with a business not wanting to do that. So if we talk tax, let's look across the board and understand it in perspective, but we also understand the value add that is generated by businesses that may not be paying formal forms of tax, but there are many other benefits.
I'm hoping that our microphone is sorted. Yes, please go ahead. Keep it very short and sweet, please,
Okay,
ladies and
perfect.
gentlemen.
Thank you. My name is Gracious, and thank you for the insightful presentation. I have to say, I also disagree with Prof on the size of the informal economy. I don't think we can talk about the informal economy without talking about immigrants and the township economy, which consists of a sizable portion of migrants, as you rightfully presented. And I think one of the panelists also mentioned the limitations of the QLFS in capturing township respondents, where you might find one respondent from Tembisa in a survey. And when I was using the needs data as well, I also struggled to find a sizable sample of African migrants. So if these traditional data sources cannot reflect the township and immigrant economy, do you think that using this data to inform labor market policies might produce systemic biases and misrepresent the reality on the ground? And should we be thinking about supplementing the traditional data sources with the Kasinomics data to be able to come up with policies that better serve the population? Thank you.
Thank you. And then we'll take probably one from the back, and then we'll take 2 questions from the back as well, and then we'll come back to our panelists to respond to the questions. Please just state your name and tell us, please keep your question very short and sweet.
Thank you. I'm interested to hear from both the panelists, or all of the panelists, the issue around the lack of social protection for informal sector workers. In the research that HSRC has done, it's been a big issue of one day's work lost because of rain, because of other factors, ill health, etc., has serious implications. We've seen WeGo demonstrating that there are potential ways of addressing that. But clearly that isn't in our radar in our South African policy framework. I'd like to hear your views. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll take one or two more questions. I think we've got one there, and then we'll go to that table over there.
Thank you very much for the presentations. They were very succinct. Thanks. So I just have a question. So local government often regulates informal traders through a series of bylaws, zoning and licensing, which may hinder economic activity in the area. So now I just want to ask what evidence-based reforms could unlock better employment absorption in the informal sector without compromising public order or revenue? Thanks.
Thank you. And then we'll do one more question at that table. Yeah.
Thank you, Doc, for the insightful presentation. This goes to Dr. Andrew. From your presentation, lesson 2, you mentioned that reciprocity sustains survivalist businesses. However, I found a contradicting finding from my study, where in rural settings, I coined a concept that I called the Ubuntu credit default. This is wherein businesses within rural communities, they offer informal credit extension, wherein a non-payment leads to a reciprocity gap. Now, this leads to a liquidity crisis and working capital crisis for the businesses, of which it stagnates the enterprises. Now they are unable to create further employment and additional employment because of the non-payment. So what I do want to understand is that what is government doing to avoid the umbrella approach to policies, more especially when the ecosystems are not the same? So normally, for now, the proposing frameworks, but when you read those frameworks, you realize that it is an umbrella approach, but the ecosystems are totally different. The functionalities are also different. Thank you very much.
Andrew, your response?
If you look at, if you ask the question, where do people do business in a township economy? The answer is either that you trade from your home or you trade in a public place. Now, the public place is the key opportunity. And this is an opportunity where you find the most concentration of business activities, and particularly public spaces that are along high streets, within transport nodes, etc. These are absolutely critical. So if you're a person that is starting up a business, you probably, unless you're home-based and you've got a little bit of capital to start something from home, you need to enter that public space. Now, what I'm talking about are the reciprocal arrangements between traders that say, okay, you can come and join, you can come and trade within our space. And one of the things that I was always impressed by was this ability to accommodate new entrants. This sense of, I'll look after your stand while you go home and fetch your children or you attend to something else. So those are the kind of reciprocal arrangements that play a critical role in the survival of businesses. And they go beyond just accommodating people and looking after stands, but they also relate to insurance for when there's a crisis that happen, a death, a funeral, etc. So these are key, what I would call reciprocal relationships that help a small business sustain, given the highly competitive nature of the township economy, as I've tried to outline, and the fact that the likelihood is that most businesses will churn very quickly. It's not to say it's perfect. There is rent-seeking behavior we see in many different contexts, but what I'm trying to argue for is this emphasis on creating accommodating platforms. And if you look at the number of public markets that we have in South Africa, there's a deficiency. And I'm not now talking about the township, I'm just taking a slightly broader lens and looking at the inner city. It's only in eThekwini where we see like a legacy of public markets. In most of our towns and cities across South Africa, there's a deficit of public markets. And public markets can become, if they're organized and managed in a way that can accommodate new entrants, in a rules-based system that places emphasis on reciprocity rather than on creating these very successful entrepreneurs, I think we're going in the right direction.
Prof, there was a clear disagreement with you on the size of the informal sector and perhaps maybe supplementing those data sets with, other data sets. What's your response to the question that was from the lady?
Yeah, thanks. I thought about this question, and it ties back to this debate which the CEO of Capitec had with the Statistician General a few months ago now. And it's really, how big is the sector? Look, from a design perspective, and some people at UCT actually did participate in the debate. It got quite public. I never said anything. So I'll tell you two stories, right? On the one side, when we're designing these surveys, we're very careful to ask like a series of questions, including like, did you do anything with your family? Did you do anything like, which has not a job, but like begging or doing some small activities? Like we ask about 7 different questions to try to get at economic activity. And from there, you code upwards to create the employment not employed variable. So in theory, we would get a lot. On the other hand, and when that debate played out, I was remembering a time about 10, 15 years ago, I was doing field work. We were going to run a livelihood study in the Eastern Cape. It's in a small valley next to the University of Fort Hare. And so I went because we needed to test our survey instrument. And there were 12 people in the room, myself and someone else from UCT, so 10 people who were going to run the study for us. And so to practice, we made everyone fill out the questionnaire for themselves. And out of the 10 who were going to run the study, 1 had a job, or at least that's what the data would have said to me. But we were working together for over 2 or 3 days to train on how to run the survey. And so we got to know people, and you talk over coffee and lunch and stuff. And then, by the end of it, I realized that just by talking to people, the unemployment rate in the conception of an economist would have been closer to 80%. Sorry, the employment rate, right? So one lady, and it was amazing for me because one lady, she had a fridge, and you could rent space in a fridge and put chicken or meat or milk or anything that goes off. And I don't know what was the rate, but she didn't think of it as a business. She was doing a service to her neighbors. But it is an economic opportunity for money. Another person had chickens and they sold eggs. Another person, they're the person in the village who had a car. And they didn't think of themselves as an Uber. That time there was no Uber actually in South Africa. But they didn't think of themselves as a taxi driver. Except if someone needed a ride into town or to the hospital or somewhere, you could ask them and you're expected to contribute to fuel. But when I asked how much was the rate, it was much more than just fuel. It would have to include some element of time and labor and capital and all those things. So there's an element of how people think about what is a job and what is an activity, which is not working so well. So that's the one side which I say it's not going to measure perfectly. But the other side which I took away from it was that if I'm interested in poverty or inequality, which are the two big things that we study anyway, it will matter, but not that much. Because for all those people, except the guy with the car, it wouldn't change in a substantive way how I thought of their welfare in a material sense. So he was 1, and okay, so maybe 1 out of 10 is a big deal, but that's the question then. And
that's where we leave it, ladies and gentlemen. I hope that that discussion was very fruitful. I know that we probably wanted more discussion and ask more questions, but unfortunately we are out of time. Can you please give it up for our fantastic panelists and for that amazing